Are you ready to rest? Welcome to our Bible study in Hebrews chapter 4. In chapter 1 we saw that Jesus was awesome, definitely better than angels. And in chapter 2 we saw that he lowered himself below the angels in order to become one of us. So he is fully God and he is fully man, and he's not afraid or ashamed to call you his brother or his sister. In Hebrews chapter 3, we're reminded how awesome Jesus is, that he's better than Moses, and we are warned against unbelief. The Hebrews of old in the Old Testament had doubts in their journey through the wilderness while Moses was leading them, and because of their lack of faith, they never made it to the promised land. And with all that in mind, we come into Hebrews 4 and we symbolize, or we find a symbol from that promised land. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Let me remind you, those who complained in the wilderness never left it. They neither got back to the old life that they craved back in Egypt, nor did they make it to the end of their journey at the promised land. So for us, there's also a promise and a warning. Whatever wilderness you're going through, learn from those Hebrews of old. Don't forget the miracles that got you where you are today. Don't lose sight of the God of those miracles. Don't focus on the wilderness. Don't focus on the problem. Don't take it out on your leaders. And keep your eyes and your thoughts fixed on Jesus, the creator, the sustainer, the finisher of everything, God's last word, your only hope, our brother. If you can do all those things, then you qualify to enter his rest. Verse 2, for we also have had the good news proclaimed to us just as they did. But the message they heard was of no value to them because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. See, it wasn't the wilderness that kept God's people from the promised land. It was unbelief. And in order to enter his rest, we must trust him, believe his word, and keep walking, keep believing. Keep the faith. Verse 3. Now, we who have believed enter that rest. Just as God has said, so I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he's spoken about the seventh day in these words, on the seventh day, God rested from all his works. And again, in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. So God is at rest. He finished creating the world on day 6. He made Adam and Eve last of all. So they didn't have to do a thing. God did all the work. He finished his work. His work of creation is complete. Adam and Eve, they just benefited from it. God did all the work. They didn't have to join in and help create the universe or the garden that God placed them in. Yeah, they had work to do in the garden, but they didn't have to make it. The work was done. Their first full day was the Sabbath. In order to stay in the garden and enjoy life with God, they just had to trust him. They just had to take him at his word. And in the same way, God's people, led by Moses, just had to trust him. All they needed to do was to have faith in order to enter Canaan, to trust him, to not harden their hearts, to not complain, to not grumble. Now, the first Jewish Christians, who were the first readers of this letter that we're working through, they had to trust Jesus. They had to trust that he had truly paid the price, fulfilled the whole law, made the ultimate sacrifice once and for all, because that meant that everything changed. Everything was different for them. So then they could rest from the practices of their old religion. And what about us too? Well, Just as Adam and Eve were able to enjoy God's finished work, so we can enjoy the finished work of Jesus. If we don't trust him, we won't find that rest. As believers today, how easy is it to slip into law and works? The gospel feels too good to be true. Surely we need to earn our salvation? To some extent, no. Maybe we feel like God will love me more if I'm a good person. We may actually know that's not true, but at some deeper psychological level, we need detaching from this way of being. It's kind of, maybe it's not rooted in our Jewish upbringing, but in our secular culture. Let's think about this for a moment. Perhaps you've known teachers who favoured the achievers, or the boss who likes you and promotes you if you work hard and are effective. Fair enough. Maybe even your parents showed you more love and affection, or just more attention when you made the grade, reached their standards, got on track with a good career. We know that society punishes criminals and honours those who make the world a better place. And the law says, do good and good things will happen to you. Do bad and bad things will happen to you. And in the same way, all religions teach about good karma and bad karma in some sort of form. And we as Christians have that teaching that you reap what you sow. So some of these examples are exactly as the world should be. Criminals should be punished. And it's right that good works are recognised. We do reap what we sow. But we must never, ever think that any amount of good works will buy us extra rest or extra peace or extra credit with God. And we must destroy any thought that doing good will allow us access to heaven. It is not our works that save us. It is Jesus' finished work that brings us into freedom and rest from trying to earn God's favour. So, we have eternal rest with God. We're saved. We're going to heaven. But there's another kind of rest that I've been talking about, the promised land of day-to-day life with Jesus, walking in step with his Spirit, knowing his rest. But remember the warning in the last chapter, it's possible to be set free from slavery and never enter rest. Take this seriously, brothers and sisters. God swore it on oath. We have been set free from the slavery of sin, but we must continue in faith. When we trust Jesus with our hunger in the heat of the day, we do find the rest that we need. Have a look at verse 6. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Now the writer's about to move our attention from Moses, the lawgiver and leader through the desert, and shift our attention to Joshua, the one who led God's people into the promised land, into Canaan. Moses died within sight of the promised land. Joshua led the people into it. But this was not the ultimate completion of God's wonderful plan. There was even more rest to come. Look at verse 8. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Now, this doesn't mean we don't have to go to work and we don't have jobs to do and tasks to do and a mission in the world. Of course we do. We've still got things to do. In fact, Adam had work to do in perfection in the Garden of Eden. Before the fall, there was work to be done. So it's not about that kind of works we're resting from. It's not an excuse to be lazy, but there is a kind of striving that is no longer required. We can rest from striving to meet God's standards. Jesus has met them for us. We can rest from the rules and regulations of religion. Jesus has completed the law for us. And this is what Jesus meant when he said in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you." And I feel there's a comparison there between the yoke of the freedom of Jesus and the peace and the rest of Jesus compared with the yoke of the law. Listen to how Eugene Peterson put it in The Message. Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, says Jesus. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Verse 11. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. Now, did you notice an interesting contrast or seeming contradiction for some in that verse? Make every effort to enter that rest. Well, I had a look at the Greek word where it talks about the effort that is to be made to enter the rest. And the word implies being speedy, like with a sense of urgency or hurry. And notice the alternative. It's following an example of disobedience, which leads to death. If you don't strive to enter the rest, you'll perish by your disobedience. So this is something we should take seriously, we should rush to do. Can we be urgent about entering rest? If I want to rest, I usually need to wind down in order to feel at rest when I'm in that place of rest. But imagine you've been travelling for hours in a hot car with no air conditioning. I'm picturing travelling south through the country of France towards the Mediterranean Sea. And imagine you finally arrived at your holiday destination. The sun is shining and you're sticky and hot. But the only thing between you and running into that beautiful Mediterranean Sea is unpacking your cases and getting changed. Now, wouldn't you be making every effort to enter that cool, soothing water? You're not unloading the car because you have to. You're not getting changed because it's a chore that has to be done. You're acting with enthusiasm because of the reward that lies ahead. And that's what I feel when I think about verse 11 here. And the labour of obedience that we have to hurry towards is faith. Not works of the law, not earning God's favour, but trusting his faithfulness. We labour to build up our faith. It was unbelief that caused God's people to fail to enter the promised land. What we work on, what we're urgent to do, and what we might want to be enthusiastic about is to have faith in Jesus, trusting him in every moment by moment in our life. Have a look at verse 12 now. Straight in from what we've just been talking about. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Is this a separate section? A new concept, unrelated from the previous ideas? This is suddenly talking about the word of God being really powerful. Well, it can't be separate because it starts with the word for, which is a kind of therefore sort of connective. The writer has been quoting the word of God quite a lot, though. And in particular, he's been referring back to a time when Israel failed to follow. And there's been warnings in the scriptures that the writer has quoted. He's been using this as a warning. And now he's saying, these passages I'm quoting are actually meant to hurt. They're meant to challenge you. You're supposed to be cut to the quick by what I'm saying. It's the word of God. The word of God is powerful. Let's not just be hearers of it. Let's take it in, study it, ask the Lord what he would have us do about it, and put it into practice. Just as the word cuts deep like a surgeon's knife, God, the author of that word, sees everything. He knows you better than you know yourself. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. The promise is glorious rest. The warning is that if we don't strive to enter this rest wholeheartedly, putting our faith in Jesus, we will never reach the fullness of the promises of God. Your works might look good to other people, but we don't give an account to them. Nothing's hidden from God's sight, and he's looking at your heart. Do you trust him? Will you put your faith in him and find rest for your soul? Verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. The instruction as a conclusion to all this is, stay in faith, hold firmly to the faith. It's not works of the law, it's not striving for our own kind of rest, it's trusting God for everything. Why? Because Jesus is our great high priest, that is, the one who has made us one with God. The necessary sacrifice has been made. Stop striving. Rest. Enjoy his presence. He's made a way. The great high priest has made the sacrifice. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to feel sympathy for our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Jesus understands our temptations. He understands the temptation to doubt, which I think is the biggest temptation being talked about in the last few chapters. But he didn't sin. We're going to see in the next chapter, Jesus is going to be compared with every other high priest that's gone before him who did sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And there it is, grace. We may receive mercy and find grace when we finally let go of our futile attempts to find rest in our own methods, when we finally allow the Word of God to cut below the surface, and when we truly drop everything we have except faith, we find grace. Unmerited favour. God's favour is on you. He's done the work. Enter his presence, holy brothers and sisters, and enter with confidence. Listen again to the words of Jesus. Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn